friends, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 5 of our read along together of Roughing It by Mark Twain. Today we're going to read 4 chapters together. I went ahead and started my cheat sheet showing our schedule of what we're going to read which day, and it looks good. It's going to be a nice long read. Let's see. Today's tea that I'm enjoying, by the way, I thought I saved the little packaging. Yes, I did, so I wouldn't forget. Today is Good Earth's sweet and spicy caffeine-free tea. It says it's a rooibos red tea infusion with bursts of sweet orange tangle with spicy cinnamon and a naturally caffeine-free rooibos red tea infusion. So yummy. And yeehaw, cowgirls and cowboys, let's go enjoy our reading today. Let's see, let me pour out my tea. This is one of those ones that smells very good. It has like a lot of spicy notes to it. It reminds me a little bit of the Bengal spice that Celestial Seasonings makes, just because it has that cinnamony flavor, and I feel like it might have chicory too, but I'm not sure, but it just has that really nice spicy flavor. And yeah, that is definitely a lot of cinnamon. What was I thinking? Definitely cinnamon. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we were reading. Yesterday, as Judy pointed out during our reading, it was just such beautiful language. I mean, I always think of Mark Twain. I mean, even though I know he wrote Huckleberry Finn, which is serious literature with a capital L, I always think of him primarily as a humorist because he is so good at being light in his reading and just making you see the absurdity of what's around. And it's just, he's so good at it that I forget how lyrical he can also be, that he had so many facets to his writing. But yeah, so yesterday what we were reading, we started out with chapter 11 and we continued with more stories of Slade, the division agent who was also a wild gunman who had murdered multiple people and yet kindly offered coffee to Mark Twain when he and his party passed through his station. Most of chapter 11 is purported to be an excerpt from an article or a book by Mr. Dimsdale. And I didn't check to see if this is a real article or if that Mark Twain is excerpting at length, or if this is something that he is writing in a different style. But it's a very long passage talking about Slade and how he had, in his latter years, become quite a drunkard, and that he was, he became a little bit less controlled in his behavior, to the point that when he was worried about the authorities perhaps wanting to arrest him because he had heard rumors they might be doing that, he then grabbed the judge and held him at gunpoint and said, well, you guys better not arrest me. Shortly afterwards, they chose to arrest him. And when they did, they then executed him and hanged him. And so it's a long passage about Slade and his ends. But it's interesting too because Twain finishes the chapter after this description of Slade and his execution, and saying how the writer had said that Slade had cried and pled like a child, which clearly showed him to be cowardly. And what Mark Twain writes afterwards is that the fact that he died in tears did not mean that he lived as a coward, and that in fact there would be, he was a man who was quite brave. He would tell cutthroats that he would tell them to his face that he was going to kill them, that he was going to get revenge upon them. And, he may have died in tears, but he didn't live as if in fear. And that he was saying that there had been other cowards who make a big dying speech and then go to their deaths with quiet dignity. But that doesn't mean that they were more brave than this Slade was. And he says, moral courage is not the requisite quality. So what could it have been that the stout-hearted Slade lacked? This bloody, desperate, kind-mannered, urbane gentleman who never hesitated to warn his most ruffianly enemies that he would kill them whenever or wherever he came across them next. And Mark Twain just ends it with, I think it is a conundrum worth investigating. So a thoughtful note in that chapter. Afterwards, we move over in chapter 12 to where they, again, are speeding along. They have gone so far, and they're saying how there had been a group of Mormons who had been traveling the same distance in 8 weeks that our folks in their stage had traversed in 8 days and only 3 hours. Again, nowadays, we'd be by much faster, but still, it's wonderful to see like the technology and the quickness of how times are changing before their very eyes. And especially too, knowing that Twain later on, he's already in a previous chapter, talked about how we see like this Mormon group walking for 8 weeks in the distance that his group was able to traverse in 8 days. And previously he had talked about how the group, you know, the journey that he and his friends had taken so many days had been done in like less than half that on the train. And so it's amazing to see how quickly things are changing and progressing just in these few chapters we've already read. So he makes it into, he makes it through the mountains. They end up into Utah. They're heading towards the Great Salt Lake. He talks a bit about the Mormons that he encounters. Sorry, there were a couple little moments in here. Well, I'll get to it, sorry. All right, you know, I'm gonna just start going into a little bit. So there were several passages that I loved in these chapters we read yesterday. I'm gonna just go ahead and highlight a few of them. When he was crossing into when they were crossing into the mountains, his amazement at seeing the snow-capped peaks, even in August, as he was like sweating and wearing this heavy, you know, he was just like, it was so hot and too warm to wear the coat that was nearby. And he said that seeing is believing, and that many a man before might have thought he understood something and might have thought he believed a truth that was well established and universally recognized. I mean, of course, there's snow in the mountains, duh. And yet there's something about until you actually see it, until you're confronted by those things at once, you might discover that he did not ever really believe them, but only thought he believed them. And I just thought that was so beautifully put, that idea that even though intellectually you know something, when you really see it, when you really experience it, it's of such a different magnitude. It just, you wonder, did you ever really believe until, I mean, you thought you believed, but you don't really believe until you feel it and experience it yourself. And it's just such a lovely way of putting it. Another passage that I loved yesterday was when he was talking about the little spring coming up in the mountains. And on one side, it goes down the mountains and it heads out to California and the West Coast. On the other, it comes down the other side of the mountain, and that little spring journeys, and eventually it meets up with the Missouri River and the Mississippi River, and it goes out through New Orleans and on into the Gulf, excuse me. And just this little tiny spring that he's seeing there in the mountain peaks that's going and crossing the country in the two directions and just crossing the entire nation. And it's just this little moment. And then he says, I freighted a leaf with a mental message for the friends at home and dropped it in the stream, but I put no stamp on it, and it was held for postage somewhere. And just that idea of just sending a message to your loved ones back home that somehow, even though across this huge distance, which at this point they've traveled 8 days and so many hours, that you could still feel connected, that knowing this little stream is a connection between you and your hometown all that way across the nation, and that maybe they won't get that message. It'll get delayed somewhere along a bank or something like that, but just to feel that connection that even across this grand nation, that we are still together. It's just, I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful image. All right, moving on, a couple comedic passages. He had a little bit in there where he was talking about Utah and how beautiful it was and how clean it is, or clean it was, and how industrious the people seem to be. And he talked about their state crests. And he was saying how in Utah they had the busy little bees, a beehive, but in his own state, which I assume was Missouri, he actually described it as two dissolute bears holding up the head of a dead and gone cask between them and making the pertinent remark, united we stand, divided we fall. And in between that united we stand, he actually had a little drunken hiccup. It's just this wonderful. I had never thought of the bears as being drunk before, but it does make sense. The cask, the barrel that they're holding between them does have the triple X's on there, which usually symbolize alcohol. And so there we go. The two crests comparing Missouri, I guess it is, with with the golden beehive of Utah. That chapter ended with him meeting Brigham Young, and after the meeting, at the closure of the meeting, Brigham Young saying to his brother, is this your child? A boy or a girl? So saying that young Mark Twain could not even be recognized as a man, he assumed to be a child, and at that, not even able to be, to tell if he was male or female. finally, the last little bit that we read in chapter 14 was him talking about like how things were done in Utah, how like, for example, there had been, it's the territory at that point, it's not a state, and there had been some non-Mormon, a Gentile, who had tried to have a contract with some Mormons, and they decided they didn't want to follow the rules there, and they didn't want to follow the contract, and so they just decided to break it. And this gentleman from outside the territory is like, what? We had a contract. That's how things work. That's the laws. It's like, I don't understand this idea of not using a contract. And so he went to speak to their king, which I presume is Brigham Young. And when he goes to speak to Brigham Young, oh no, it says Mr. Young. Yes, so it is Brigham Young. He goes to talk to them, and he calls his men forth, and he's like, these people, they signed this thing. They said they would do it. They need to honor it. And as soon as Brigham Young says they need to do it, they absolutely do. And it says how they were working hard and they were doing things. And so even though Utah is not supposed to be a monarchy, or it's supposed to be Republican, in practice, it seems to be more like a monarchy with Brigham Young as the king. And so he tells this story to Mark Twain and his friends. And Mark Twain, by the way, he also makes a big deal saying how they had wanted to go sightseeing and see the Great Salt Lake, but then they ended up not bothering because once they were nearby, they got kind of lazy. But they had really been curious about the institution of polygamy, and they wanted to know like how it works and like who would do such a thing, and is this like it's so, he was feverish to plunge in headlong and achieve a great reform here to stop this heathen practice. I threw in heathen, but this practice that was not in accordance with what he believed. But then here we go. This is a better photo or better drawing to illustrate. In a bit of tongue-in-cheek understatement, perhaps, we'll look at this drawing. He says when he saw the Mormon women, instead of being appalled at this institution of polygamy, he was touched instead. And it warmed towards these poor, ungainly, and pathetically homely creatures. And to hide the moisture in his eyes, the tears, I guess at the sorrow of seeing these unattractive women, he said, "No! The man that marries one of them has done an act of Christian charity, which entitles him to the kindly applause of mankind, not their harsh censure. And the man that marries 60 of them has done a deed of open-handed generosity, so sublime that the nation should stand uncovered in his presence and worship in silence." So, naughty Mark Twain. Saying that the ladies are so ugly, it's a mercy that these men would be willing to marry them, and in fact, to take more of them off the market. That is a justification for polygamy, or a reason for polygamy I'd never heard of before. Okay, so today we are reading chapters 15 through 18. And so I should go ahead and get started. That is so yummy. All right, if you're having something particularly good today, please go ahead and let me know. I'm always curious to see about new teas. All right, chapter 15 of Roughing It by Mark Twain. It is a luscious country for thrilling evening stories about assassinations of intractable Gentiles. I cannot easily conceive of anything more cozy than the night in Salt Lake, which we spent in a Gentile den, smoking pipes and listening to tales of how Burton galloped in among the pleading and defenseless Morosites and shot them down, men and women, like so many dogs. And how Bill Hickman, a destroying angel, shot Drown and Arnold dead for bringing suit against him for a debt. And how Porter Rockwell did this and that dreadful thing. And how heedless people often come to Utah and make remarks about Brigham or polygamy or some other sacred matter. And the very next morning at daylight, such parties are sure to be found lying up some back alley, contentedly waiting for the hearse. And the next most interesting thing is to sit and listen to these Gentiles talk about polygamy, and how some portly old frog of an elder or a bishop marries a girl, likes her, marries her sister, likes her, marries another sister, likes her, takes another, likes her, marries another, likes her, marries her father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and then comes back hungry and asks for more. And how the pert young thing of 11 will chance to be the favorite wife, and her own venerable grandmother have to rank away down towards D4 in their mutual husband's esteem, and have to sleep in the kitchen as like as not. And how this dreadful sort of thing, this hiving together in one foul nest of mother and daughters, and the making a young daughter superior to her own mother in rank and authority, are things which Mormon women submit to because their religion teaches them that the more wives a man has on earth and the more children he rears, the higher the place they will all have in the world to come, and the warmer, maybe, though they do not seem to say anything about that. According to these Gentile friends of ours, Brigham Young's harem contains 20 or 30 wives. They said that some of them had grown old and gone out of active service, but were comfortably housed and cared for in the hennery, or the lion house as it is strangely named. Along with each wife were her children, 50 altogether. The house was perfectly quiet and orderly when the children were still. They all took their meals in one room, and a happy and home-like sight it was pronounced to be. None of our party got an opportunity to take dinner with Mr. Young, but a Gentile by the name of Johnson professed to have enjoyed a sociable breakfast in the Lion House. He gave a preposterous account of the calling of the roll and other preliminaries, and the carnage that ensued when the buckwheat cakes come in. But he embellished rather too much. He said that Mr. Young told him several smart sayings of certain of his 2-year-olds, observing with some pride that for many years he had been the heaviest contributor in that line to one of the Eastern magazines. And then he wanted to show Mr. Johnson one of the pets that had said the last good thing, but he could not find the child. He searched the faces of the children in detail, but could not decide which one it was. Finally, he gave it up with a sigh and said, I thought I would know the little cub again, but I don't. Mr. Johnson said further that Mr. Young observed that life was a sad, sad thing, because the joy of every new marriage a man contracted was so apt to be blighted by the inopportune funeral of a less recent bride. And Mr. Johnson said that while he and Mr. Young were pleasantly conversing in private, one of the Mrs. Youngs came in and demanded a breastpin, remarking that she had found out that he had been giving a breastpin to number 6, and she, for one, did not propose to let this partiality go on without making a satisfactory amount of trouble about it. Mr. Young reminded her that there was a stranger present. Mrs. Young said that if the state of things inside the house was not agreeable to the stranger, he could find room outside. Mr. Young promised the breastpin, and she went away. But in a minute or two, another Mrs. Young came in and demanded a breastpin. Mr. Young began a remonstrance, but Mrs. Young cut him short. She said number 6 had got one, and number 11 was promised one, and it was no use for him to try to impose on her. She hoped she knew her rights. He gave his promise, and she went. And presently, 3 Mrs. Youngs entered in a body and opened on their husband a tempest of tears, abuse, and entreaty. They had all heard about number 6, number 11, and number 14. 3 more breastpins were promised. They were hardly gone when 9 more Mrs. Youngs filed into the presence, and a new tempest burst forth and raged round about the prophet and his guest. 9 breastpins were promised, and the weird sisters filed out again. And in came 11 more, weeping and wailing and gnashing their teeth. 11 promised breastpins purchased peace once more. "That is a specimen," said Mr. Young. "You see how it is. You see what a life I lead. A man can't be wise all the time. In a heedless moment, I gave my darling number 6, excuse my calling her thus, as her other name has escaped me for the moment, a breastpin. It was only worth $25. That is, apparently that was its whole cost, but its ultimate cost was inevitably bound to be a good deal more. You yourself have seen it climb up to $650, and alas, even that is not the end. For I have wives all over this territory of Utah. I have dozens of wives whose numbers even I do not know without looking in the family Bible. They are scattered far and wide among the mountains and valleys of my realm. And mark you, every solitary one of them will hear of this wretched breastpin, and every last one of them will have one or die. Number 6 breastpin will cost me $2,500 before I see the end of it, and these creatures will compare these pins together, and if one is a shade finer than the rest, they will all be thrown on my hands, and I will have to order a new lot to keep peace in the family. Sir, you probably did not know it, but all the time you were present with my children, your every movement was watched by vigilant servitors of mine. If you had offered to give a child a dime, or a stick of candy, or any trifle of the kind, you would have been snatched out of the house instantly, provided it could be done before your gift left your hand. Otherwise, it would be absolutely necessary for you to make an exactly similar gift to all my children. And knowing by experience the importance of the thing, I would have stood by and seen to it myself that you did it, and did it thoroughly. Once a gentleman gave one of my children a tin whistle. a veritable invention of Satan, sir, and one which I have an unspeakable horror of, and so would you if you had 80 or 90 children in your house. But the deed was done. The man escaped. I knew what the result was going to be, and I thirsted for vengeance. I ordered out a flock of destroying angels, and they hunted the man far into the fastnesses of the Nevada mountains. But they never caught him. I am not cruel, sir. I am not vindictive, except when sorely outraged. But if I had caught him, sir, so help me Joseph Smith, I would have locked him into the nursery till the brats whistled him to death. By the slaughtered body of Saint Parley Pratt, whom God assoil, there was never anything on this earth like it. I knew who gave the whistle to the child, but I could not make those jealous mothers believe me. They believed I did it, and the result was just what any man of reflection could have foreseen. I had to order 110 whistles. I think we had 110 children in the house then, but some of them are off at college now. I had to order 110 of those shrieking things, and I wish I may never speak another word if we didn't have to talk on our fingers entirely from that time forth until the children got tired of the whistles. And if ever another man gives a whistle to a child of mine and I get my hands on him, I will hang him higher than Haman. That is the word with the bark on it. Shade of Nephi, you don't know anything about married life. I am rich and everybody knows it. I am benevolent and everybody takes advantage of it. I have a strong fatherly instinct and all the foundlings are foisted on me. Every time a woman wants to do well by her darling, she puzzles her brain to cipher out some scheme for getting it into my hands. Why, sir, a woman came here once with a child of a curious, lifeless sort of complexion, and so had the woman, and swore that the child was mine and she my wife, that I had married her at such and such a time and such a place, but she had forgotten her number, and of course I could not remember her name. Well, sir, she called my attention to the fact that the child looked like me, and really, it did seem to resemble me, a common thing in the territory, and to cut the story short, I put it in my nursery, and she left. And by the ghost of Orson Hyde, when they came to wash the paint off that child, it was an Injun. Bless my soul, you don't know anything about married life. It is a perfect dog's life, sir. A perfect dog's life. You can't economize. It isn't possible. I have tried keeping one set of bridal attire for all occasions, but it is of no use. First, you'll marry a combination of calico and consumption that's as thin as a rail, and next you'll get a creature that's nothing more than the dropsy in disguise, and then you've got to eke out that bridal dress with an old balloon. That is the way it goes. And think of the wash bill. Excuse these tears. 984 pieces a week. No, sir, there is no such a thing as economy in a family like mine. Why, just the one item of cradles. Think of it. And vermifuge, soothing syrup, teething rings, and papa's watches for the babies to play with, and things to scratch the furniture with, and lucifer matches for them to eat, and pieces of glass to cut themselves with. The item of glass alone would support your family, I venture to say, sir. Let me scrimp and squeeze all I can, I still can't get ahead as fast as I feel I ought to with my opportunities. Bless you, sir. At a time when I had 72 wives in this house, I groaned under the pressure of keeping thousands of dollars tied up in 72 bedsteads when the money ought to have been out at interest. And I just sold out the whole stock, sir, at a sacrifice, and built a bedstead 7 feet long and 96 feet wide. But it was a failure, sir. I could not sleep. It appeared to me that the whole 72 women snored at once. The roar was deafening. And then the danger of it. That was what I was looking at. They would all draw in their breath at once, and you could actually see the walls of the house suck in. And then they would all exhale their breath at once. And you could see the walls swell out and strain, and hear the rafters crack and the shingles grind together. My friend, take an old man's advice and don't encumber yourself with a large family. Mind, I tell you, don't do it. In a small family, and in a small family only, you will find that comfort and that peace of mind which are the best at last of the blessings this world is able to afford us, and for the lack of which no accumulation of wealth and no acquisition of fame, power, and greatness can ever compensate us. Take my word for it, 10 or 11 wives is all you need. Never go over it. Some instinct or other made me set this Johnson down as being unreliable. And yet, he was a very entertaining person, and I doubt if some of the information he gave us could have been acquired from any other source. He was a pleasant contrast to these reticent Mormons. And here's a drawing of the family bedstead, as Johnson describes it in the Brigham Young home. Now, chapter 16. All men have heard of the Mormon Bible, but few except the elect have seen it, or at least taken the trouble to read it. I brought away a copy from Salt Lake. The book is a curiosity to me. It is such a pretentious affair, and yet so slow, so sleepy, such an insipid mess of inspiration. It is chloroform in print. If Joseph Smith composed this book, the act was a miracle. Keeping awake while he did it was, at any rate. If he, according to tradition, merely translated it from certain ancient and mysteriously engraved plates of copper, which he declares he found under a stone in an out-of-the-way locality, the work of translating was equally a miracle, for the same reason. The book seems to be merely a prosy detail of imaginary history with the Old Testament for a model, followed by a tedious plagiarism of the New Testament. The author labored to give his words and phrases the quaint, old-fashioned sound and structure of our King James's translation of the Scriptures, and the result is a mongrel, half-modern glibness and half-ancient simplicity and gravity. The latter is awkward and constrained, the former natural, but grotesque by the contrast. Whenever he found his speech growing too modern, which was about every sentence or two, he ladled in a few such scriptural phrases as exceedingly sore and it came to pass, etc., and made things satisfactory again. And it came to pass was his pet. If he had left this out, his Bible would have been only a pamphlet. The title page reads as follows: The Book of Mormon, an account written by the hand of Mormon upon plates taken from the plates of Nephi. Wherefore it is an abridgment of the record of the people of Nephi, and also of the Lamanites, written to the Lamanites, who are a remnant of the house of Israel, and also to Jew and Gentile, written by way of commandment, and also by the spirit of prophecy and of revelation, written and sealed up and hid up unto the Lord, that they might not be destroyed, to come forth by the gift and power of God unto the interpretation thereof, sealed by the hand of Moroni, and hid up unto the Lord, to come forth in due time by the way of Gentile, the interpretation thereof by the gift of God. An abridgment taken from the book of Ether also, which is a record of the people of Jared, who were scattered at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people when they were building a tower to get to heaven. Hid up is good, and so is wherefore, though why wherefore? Any other word would have answered as well, though in truth it would not have sounded so scriptural. Next comes the testimony of 3 witnesses. Be it known unto all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people unto whom this work shall come, that we, through the grace of God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ, have seen the plates which contain this record, which is a record of the people of Nephi, and also of the Lamanites, their brethren, and also of the people of Jared, who came from the tower of which hath been spoken. And we also know that they have been translated by the gift and power of God, for his voice hath declared it unto us. Wherefore we know of a surety that the work is true. And we also testify that we have seen the engravings which are upon the plates, and they have been shown unto us by the power of God, and not of man. And we declare with words of soberness that an angel of God came down from heaven, and he brought and laid before our eyes that we beheld and saw the plates and the engravings thereon. And we know that it is by the grace of God, the Father, and our Lord Jesus Christ, that we beheld and bear record that these things are true, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Nevertheless, the voice of the Lord commanded us that we should bear record of it. Wherefore, to be obedient unto the commandments of God, we bear testimony of these things. And we know that if we are faithful in Christ, we shall rid our garments of the blood of all men, and be found spotless before the judgment seat of Christ, and shall dwell with him eternally in the heavens. And the honor be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, which is one God. Amen. Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Martin Harris. Some people have to be a world of evidence, some people have to have a world of evidence before they can come anywhere in the neighborhood of believing anything. But for me, when a man tells me he has seen the engravings which are upon the plates, and not only that, but an angel was there at the time and saw him see them, and probably took his receipt for it, I am very far on the road to conviction, no matter whether I ever heard of that man before or not, and even if I do not know the name of the angel, or his nationality either. Next is this. And also the testimony of 8 witnesses. Be it known unto all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people unto whom this work shall come, that Joseph Smith, Jr., the translator of this work, has shown unto us the plates of which hath been spoken, which have the appearance of gold, and as many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands, and we also saw the engravings thereon, all of which has the appearance of ancient work and of curious workmanship. And this we bear record with words of soberness, that the said Smith has shown unto us, for we have seen and hefted, and know of a surety that the said Smith has got the plates of which we have spoken. And we give our names unto the world, to witness unto the world that which we have seen. And we lie not, God bearing witness of it. Christian Whitmer, Jacob Whitmer, Peter Whitmer Jr., John Whitmer, Hiram Page, Joseph Smith Sr., Hiram Smith, Samuel H. Smith. And when I am far on the road to conviction, and 8 men, be they grammatical or otherwise, come forward and tell me that they have seen the plates too, and not only seen these plates, but hefted them, I am convinced. I could not feel more satisfied and at rest if the entire Whitmer family had testified. The Mormon Bible consists of 15 books, being the books of Jacob, Enos, Jerem, Omni, Mosiah, Zeniff, Alma, Helaman, Ether, Moroni, 2 books of Mormon, and 3 of Nephi. In the first book of Nephi is a plagiarism of the Old Testament, which gives an account of the exodus from Jerusalem of the children of Lehi, and it goes on to tell of their wanderings in the wilderness during 8 years and their supernatural protection by one of their number, a party by the name of Nephi. They finally reached the land of Bountiful and camped by the sea. After they had remained there for the space of many days, which is more scriptural than definite, Nephi was commanded from on high to build a ship wherein to carry the people across the waters. He travestied Noah's ark, but he obeyed orders in the matter of the plan. He finished the ship in a single day, while his brethren stood by and made fun of it, and of him too, saying, Our brother is a fool, for he thinketh that he can build a ship. They did not wait for the timbers to dry, but the whole tribe or nation sailed the next day. Then a bit of genuine nature cropped out and is revealed by outspoken Nephi with scriptural frankness. They all got on a spree. They, and also their wives, began to make themselves merry, insomuch that they began to dance, and to sing, and to speak with much rudeness. Yea, they were lifted up into exceeding rudeness. Nephi tried to stop these scandalous proceedings, but they tied him neck and heels and went on with their lark. But observe how Nephi the prophet circumvented them by the aid of the invisible powers. And it came to pass that after they had bound me, insomuch that I could not move, the compass which had been prepared of the Lord did cease to work. Wherefore they knew not whither they should steer the ship, insomuch that there arose a great storm, yes, a great and terrible tempest, and we were driven back upon the waters for the space of 3 days. And they began to be frightened exceedingly, lest they should be drowned in the sea. Nevertheless they did not lose me. And on the 4th day, which we had been driven back, the tempest began to be exceedingly sore. And it came to pass that we were about to be swallowed up in the depths of the sea. Then they untie him. And it came to pass, after they had loosed me, behold, I took the compass, and it did work whither I desired it. And it came to pass that I prayed unto the Lord, and after I had prayed, the winds did cease, and the storm did cease, and there was a great calm. Equipped with their compass, these ancients appear to have had the advantage of Noah. Their voyage was toward a promised land, the only name they give it. They reached it in safety. Polygamy is a recent feature in the Mormon religion and was added by Brigham Young after Joseph Smith's death. Before that, it was regarded as an abomination. This verso from the Mormon Bible occurs in chapter 2 of the book of Jacob. For behold, thus saith the Lord, This people began to wax in iniquity. They understand not the scriptures, for they seek to excuse themselves in committing whoredoms because of the things which were written concerning David and Solomon his son. Behold, David and Solomon truly had many wives and concubines, which thing was abomination before me, saith the Lord. Wherefore, thus saith the Lord, I have led this people forth out of the land of Jerusalem by the power of mine arm, that I might raise up unto me a righteous branch from the fruit of the loins of Joseph. Wherefore I, the Lord God, will not suffer that this people shall do like unto them of old. However, the project failed, or at least the modern Mormon end of it, for Brigham suffers it. This verse is from the same chapter. Behold, the Lamanites your brethren, whom ye hate, because of their filthiness and the cursings which hath come upon their skins, are more righteous than you, for they have not forgotten the commandment of the Lord, which is given unto our fathers, that they should have, save it were one wife, and concubines they should have none. The following verse from chapter 9 of the book of Nephi appears to contain information not familiar to everybody. And now it came to pass that when Jesus had ascended into heaven, the multitude did disperse, and every man did take his wife and his children, and did return to his own home. And it came to pass that on the morrow, when the multitude was gathered together, behold, Nephi and his brother, whom he had raised from the dead, whose name was Timothy, and also his son, whose name was Jonas, and also Mathani and Mathanaha, his brother, and Cumin and Cumenonhi, and Jeremiah and Shemnon, and Jonas, and Zedekiah, and Isaiah. Now these were the names of the disciples whom Jesus had chosen. In order that the reader may observe how much more grandeur and picturesqueness, as seen by these Mormon 12, accompanied one of the tenderer episodes in the life of our Savior than any other eyes seem to have been aware of, I quote the following from the same book, Nephi. And it came to pass that Jesus spake unto them, and bade them arise. And they arose from the earth, and he said unto them, Blessed are ye because of your faith. And now, behold, my joy is full. And when he had said these words, he wept, and the multitude bare record of it. And he took their little children, one by one, and blessed them, and prayed unto the Father for them. And when he had done this, he wept again. And he spake unto the multitude, and saith unto them, Behold your little ones. And as they looked to behold, they cast their eyes toward heaven, and they saw the heavens open, and they saw angels descending out of heaven, as it were, in the midst of fire. And they came down and encircled those little ones about. They were encircled about with fire, and the angels did minister unto them. And the multitude did see and hear and bear record. And they know that their record is true, for they all of them did see and hear, every man for himself. And they were in number about 2,500 souls. And they did consist of men, women, and children. And what else would they be likely to consist of? The Book of Ether is an incomprehensible medley of history, much of it relating to battles and sieges among peoples whom the reader has possibly never heard of, and who inhabited a country which is not set down in the geography. There was a king with the remarkable name of Coriantumr, and he warred with Shared, and Lib, and Shiz, and others in the plains of Heshlon, and the valley of Gilgal, and the wilderness of Achish, and the land of Moran, and the plains of Agosh, and Ogath, and Ramah, and the lands of Korahor, and the hill Comnor, by the waters of Ripliankum, etc., etc., etc. And it came to pass, after a deal of fighting, that Coriantumr, upon making calculation of his losses, found that there had been slain 2 millions of mighty men, and also their wives and their children, say 500,000, or 5 million or 6 million in all. And he began to sorrow in his heart. Unquestionably, it was time. So he wrote to Shiz, asking a cessation of hostilities and offering to give up his kingdom to save his people. Shiz declined, except upon condition that Coriantumr would come and let him cut his head off first, a thing which Coriantumr would not do. Then there was more fighting for a season. Then 4 years were devoted to gathering the forces for a final struggle, after which ensued a battle which, I take it, is the most remarkable set forth in history, except, perhaps, that of the Kilkenny cats, which it resembles in some respects. This is the account of the gathering and the battle. 7. And it came to pass that they did gather together all the people upon all the face of the land, who had not been slain, save it was Ether. And it came to pass that Ether did behold all the doings of the people, and he beheld that the people who were for Coriantumr were gathered together to the army of Coriantumr, and the people who were for Shiz were gathered together to the army of Shiz. Wherefore they were for the space of 4 years gathering together the people, that they might get all who were upon the face of the land, and that they might receive all the strength which it was possible they would receive. And it came to pass that when they were all gathered together, every one of the army which he would, with their wives and their children, both men, women, and children being armed with weapons of war, having shields and breastplates and headplates, and being clothed after the manner of war, they did march forth one against another to battle. And they fought all that day, and conquered not. And it came to pass that when it was night, they were weary, and retired to their camps. And after they had retired to their camps, they took up a howling and a lamentation for the loss of the slain of their people. And so great were their cries, their howlings and lamentations, that it did rend the air exceedingly. And it came to pass that on the morrow they did go again to battle, and great and terrible was that day. Nevertheless, they conquered not. And when the night came again, they did rend the air with their cries and their howlings and their mournings for the loss of the slain of their people. 8. And it came to pass that Coriantumr wrote again an epistle unto Shiz, desiring that he would not come again to battle, but that he would take the kingdom and spare the lives of the people. But behold, the Spirit of the Lord had ceased striving with them, and Satan had full power over the hearts of the people, for they were given up unto the hardness of their hearts and the blindness of their minds, that they might be destroyed. Wherefore they went again to battle. And it came to pass that they fought all that day, and when the night came, they slept upon their swords. And on the morrow they fought even until the night came. And when the night came, they were drunken with anger, even as a man who is drunken with wine. And they slept again upon their swords, and on the morrow they fought again. And when the night came, they had all fallen by the sword, save it were 52 of the people of Coriantumr, and 69 of the people of Shiz. And it came to pass that they slept upon their swords that night, and on the morrow they fought again. And they contended in their nights with their swords and with their shields all that day. And when the night came, there were 32 of the people of Shiz, and 27 of the people of Coriantumr. 9. And it came to pass that they ate and slept and prepared for death on the morrow. And they were large and mighty men as to the strength of men. And it came to pass that they fought for the space of 3 hours, and they fainted with the loss of blood. And it came to pass that when the men of Coriantumr had received sufficient strength that they could walk, they were about to flee for their lives. But behold, Shiz arose, and also his men, and he swore in his wrath that he would slay Coriantumr, or he would perish by the sword. Wherefore he did pursue them, and on the morrow he did overtake them, and they fought again with the sword. And it came to pass that when they had all fallen by the sword, save it were Coriantumr and Shiz, behold, Shiz had fainted with loss of blood. And it came to pass that when Coriantumr had leaned upon his sword, that he rested a little, he smote off the head of Shiz. And it came to pass that after he had smote off the head of Shiz, that Shiz raised upon his hands and fell. And after that he had struggled for breath and died. And it came to pass that Coriantumr fell to the earth, and became as if he had no life. And the Lord spake unto Ether, and said unto him, Go forth. And he went forth, and beheld that the words of the Lord had all been fulfilled. And he finished his record, and the 100th part I have not written. It seems a pity he did not finish, for after all his dreary former chapters of commonplace, he stopped just as it was in danger of becoming interesting. The Mormon Bible is rather stupid and tiresome to read, but there is nothing vicious in its teachings. Its code of morals is unobjectionable. It is smooched from the New Testament and no credit given. Chapter 17. At the end of our 2 days' sojourn, we left Great Salt Lake City, hearty and well-fed and happy, physically superb, but not so very much wiser as regards the Mormon question than we were when we arrived, perhaps. We had a deal more information than we had before, of course, but we did not know what portion of it was reliable and what was not, for it all came from acquaintances of a day, strangers, strictly speaking. We were told, for instance, that the dreaded Mountain Meadows massacre was the work of the Indians entirely, and that the Gentiles had meanly tried to fasten it upon the Mormons. We were told likewise that the Indians were to blame partly, and partly the Mormons. And we were told likewise, and just as positively, that the Mormons were almost, if not wholly and completely responsible for that most treacherous and pitiless butchery. We got the story in all these different shapes, but it was not till several years afterward that Mrs. Waits's book, The Mormon Prophet, came out with Judge Cradlebaugh's trial of the accused parties in it and revealed the truth that the latter version was the correct one and that the Mormons were the assassins. All our information had 3 sides to it, and so I gave up the idea that I could settle the Mormon question in 2 days. Still, I have seen newspaper correspondents do it in 1. I left Great Salt Lake a good deal confused as to what state of things existed there, and sometimes even questioning in my own mind whether a state of things existed there at all or not. But presently I remembered with a lightning sense of relief that we had learned 2 or 3 trivial things there which we could be certain of, and so the 2 days were not wholly lost. For instance, we had learned that we were at last in a pioneer land, in absolute and tangible reality. The high prices charged for trifles were eloquent of high freights and bewildering distances of freightage. In the East, in those days, the smallest money denomination was a penny, and it represented the smallest purchasable quantity of any commodity. West of Cincinnati, the smallest coin in use was a silver 5-cent piece, and no smaller quantity of an article could be bought than 5 cents worth. In Overland City, the lowest coin appeared to be the 10-cent piece. But in Salt Lake, there did not seem to be any money in circulation smaller than a quarter, or any smaller quantity purchasable of any commodity than 25 cents worth. We had always been used to half dimes and 5 cents worth as the minimum of financial negotiations. But in Salt Lake, if one wanted a cigar, it was a quarter. If you wanted a chalk pipe, it was a quarter. If you wanted a peach, or a candle, or a newspaper, or a shave, or a little Gentile whiskey to rub on his corns to arrest indigestion and keep him from having the toothache, 25 cents was the price, every time. When we looked at the shop bag of silver now and then, we seemed to be wasting our substance in riotous living. But if we referred to the expense account, we could see that we had not been doing anything of the kind. But people easily get reconciled to big money and big prices, and fond and vain of both. It is a descent to little coins and cheap prices that is hardest to bear and slowest to take hold upon one's toleration. After a month's acquaintance with the 25-cent minimum, the average human being is ready to blush every time he thinks of his despicable 5-cent days. How sunburnt with blushes I used to get in gaudy Nevada every time I thought of my first financial experience in Salt Lake. It was on this wise, which is a favorite expression of great authors, and a very neat one too, but I never hear anybody say on this wise when they are talking. So, a young half-breed with a complexion like a yellow jacket asked me if I would have my boots blacked. It was at the Salt Lake house the morning after we arrived. I said yes, and he blacked them. Then I handed him a silver 5-cent piece with the benevolent air of a person who is conferring wealth and blessedness upon poverty and suffering. The yellow jacket took it with what I judged to be suppressed emotion, and laid it reverently down in the middle of his broad hand. Then he began to contemplate it, much as a philosopher contemplates a gnat's ear in the ample field of his microscope. Several mountaineers, teamsters, stage drivers, etc. drew near and dropped into the tableau and fell to surveying the money with that attractive indifference to formality which is noticeable in the hardy pioneer. Presently, the yellow jacket handed the half-dime back to me and told me I ought to keep my money in my pocketbook instead of in my soul, and then I wouldn't get it cramped and shriveled up so. What a roar of vulgar laughter there was. I destroyed the mongrel reptile on the spot, but I smiled and smiled all the time I was detaching his scalp, for the remark he made was good for an Injun. Yes, we had learned in Salt Lake to be charged great prices without letting the inward shudder appear on the surface, for even already we had overheard and noted the tenor of conversations among drivers, conductors, and hostlers, and finally among citizens of Salt Lake, until we were well aware that these superior beings despised emigrants. We permitted no telltale shudders and winces in our countenances, for we wanted to seem pioneers or Mormons, half-breeds, teamsters, stage drivers, mountain meadow assassins, anything in the world that the Plains and Utah respected and admired. But we were wretchedly ashamed of being emigrants, and sorry enough that we had white shirts and could not swear in the presence of ladies without looking the other way. And many a time in Nevada afterwards, we had occasion to remember with humiliation that we were emigrants, and consequently a low and inferior sort of creature. Perhaps the reader has visited Utah, Nevada, or California, even in these latter days, and while communing with himself upon the sorrowful banishment of those countries from what he considers the world, has had his wings clipped by finding that he is the one to be pitied, and that there are entire populations around him ready and willing to do it for him. Yea, who are complacently doing it for him already, wherever he steps his foot. Poor thing, they are making fun of his hat and the cut of his New York coat, and his conscientiousness about his grammar, and his feeble profanity, and his consumingly ludicrous ignorance of oars, shafts, tunnels, and other things which he never saw before, and never felt enough interest in to read about. And all the time that he is thinking what a sad fate it is to be exiled to that far country, that lonely land, the citizens around him are looking down on him with a blighting compassion because he is an emigrant, instead of that proudest and blessedest creature that exists on all the earth, a 49er. The accustomed coach life began again now, and by midnight it almost seemed as if we never had been out of our snuggery among the mail sacks at all. We had made one alteration, however. We had provided enough bread, boiled ham, and hard-boiled eggs to last double the 600 miles of staging we had still to do. And it was comfort in those succeeding days to sit up and contemplate the majestic panorama of mountains and valleys spread out below us, and eat ham and hard-boiled eggs while our spiritual natures reveled alternately in rainbows, thunderstorms, and peerless sunsets. Nothing helps scenery like ham and eggs. Ham and eggs, and after these a pipe, an old, rank, delicious pipe. Ham and eggs and scenery, a downgrade, a flying coach, a fragrant pipe, and a contented heart. These make happiness. It is what all the ages have struggled for. And now chapter 18. At 8 in the morning, we reached the remnant and ruin of what had been the important military station of Camp Floyd, some 45 or 50 miles from Salt Lake City. At 4 p.m., we had doubled our distance and were 90 or 100 miles from Salt Lake. And now we entered upon one of that species of deserts whose concentrated hideousness shames the diffused and diluted horrors of Sahara, an alkali desert. For 68 miles, there was but one break in it. I do not remember that this was really a break. Indeed, it seems to me that it was nothing but a watering depot in the midst of the stretch of 68 miles. If my memory serves me, there was no well or spring at this place, but the water was hauled there by mule and ox teams from the further side of the desert. There was a stage station there. It was 45 miles from the beginning of the desert and 23 from the end of it. We plowed and dragged and groped along the whole livelong night, and at the end of this uncomfortable 12 hours, we finished the 45-mile part of the desert and got to the stage station where the imported water was. The sun was just rising. It was easy enough to cross a desert in the night while we were asleep, and it was pleasant to reflect in the morning that we, an actual person, had encountered an absolute desert and could always speak knowingly of deserts in presence of the ignorant thenceforward. And it was pleasant also to reflect that this was not an obscure backcountry desert, but a very celebrated one, the metropolis itself, as you may say. All this was very well and very comfortable and satisfactory, but now we were to cross a desert in daylight. This was fine, novel, romantic, dramatically adventurous. This, indeed, was worth living for, worth traveling for. We would write home all about it. This enthusiasm, this stern thirst for adventure, wilted under the sultry August sun and did not last above 1 hour. One poor little hour. And then we were ashamed that we had gushed so. The poetry was all in the anticipation. There is none in the reality. Imagine a vast, waveless ocean stricken dead and turned to ashes. Imagine this solemn waste tufted with ash-dusted sage bushes. Imagine the lifeless silence and solitude that belong to such a place. Imagine a coach creeping like a bug through the midst of this shoreless level and sending up tumbled volumes of dust as if it were a bug that went by steam. Imagine this aching monotony of toiling and plowing kept up hour after hour, and the shore still as far away as ever apparently. Imagine team, driver, coach, and passengers so deeply coated with ashes that they are all one colorless color. Imagine ash drifts roosting above mustaches and eyebrows like snow accumulations on boughs and bushes. This is the reality of it. The sun beats down with dead, blistering, relentless malignity. The perspiration is welling from every pore in man and beast, but scarcely a sign of it finds its way to the surface. It is absorbed before it gets there. There is not the faintest breath of air stirring. There is not a merciful shred of cloud in all the brilliant firmament. There is not a living creature visible in any direction whither one searches the blank level that stretches its monotonous miles on every hand. There is not a sound, not a sigh, not a whisper, not a buzz nor a whir of wings or distant pipe of bird, not even a sob from the lost souls that doubtless people that dead air. And so the occasional sneezing of the resting mules and the champing of the bits graze heartily on the grim stillness, not dissipating the spell, but accenting it and making one feel more lonesome and forsaken than before. The mules, under violent swearing, coaxing, and whip-cracking, would make at stated intervals a spurt and drag the coach 100 or maybe 200 yards, stirring up a billowy cloud of dust that rolled back, enveloping the vehicle to the wheel tops or higher, and making it seem afloat in a fog. Then a rest followed, with the usual sneezing and bit champing. Then another spurt of 100 yards and another rest at the end of it. All day long we kept this up, without water for the mules and without ever changing the team. At least we kept it up 10 hours, which I take it is a day, and a pretty honest one in an alkali desert. It was from 4 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and it was so hot and so close, and our water canteens went dry in the middle of the day, and we got so thirsty. It was so stupid and tiresome and dull, and the tedious hours did lag and drag and limp along with such a cruel deliberation. It was so trying to give one's watch a good, long, undisturbed spell, and then take it out and find that it had been fooling away the time and not trying to get ahead any. The alkali dust cut through our lips. It persecuted our eyes. It ate through the delicate membranes and made our noses bleed and kept them bleeding. And truly and seriously, the romance all faded far away and disappeared and left the desert trip nothing but a harsh reality. A thirsty, sweltering, longing, hateful reality. 2 miles and a quarter an hour for 10 hours. That was what we accomplished. It was hard to bring the comprehension away down to such a snail pace as that, when we had been used to making 8 and 10 miles an hour. When we reached the station on the farther verge of the desert, we were glad, for the first time, that the dictionary was along, because we never could have found language to tell how glad we were in any sort of dictionary but an unabridged one with pictures in it. But there could not have been found in a whole library of dictionaries language sufficient to tell how tired those mules were after their 23-mile pull. To try to give the reader an idea of how thirsty they were would be to gild refined gold or paint the lily. Somehow, now that it is there, the quotation does not seem to fit, but no matter, let it stay anyhow. I think it is a graceful and attractive thing, and therefore have tried time and time again to work it in where it would fit, but could not succeed. These efforts have kept my mind distracted and ill at ease, and made my narrative seem broken and disjointed in places. Under these circumstances, it seems to me best to leave it in as above, since this will afford at least a temporary respite from the wear and tear of trying to lead up to this really apt and beautiful quotation. That concludes our chapter. I'm just going to show you that picture of a very, very tired, thirsty donkey after trekking 23 miles through the desert. Oh, and I think I am going to finish my drink and probably have another glass. After reading about trekking through the desert and being so thirsty, I also am remarkably thirsty. It's the power of suggestion. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day and that you are keeping hydrated. Very important. All right, so I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I will see you, I hope, tomorrow for more readings from Roughing It by Mark Twain. Take care, friends. Bye.